blessed, lift, and encouraged this morning, God. It was such a little hour. God, just bless and only you can. We'll give you all the honor, the glory, and the praise. For it's in Jesus' precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen. We're in Genesis chapter 4. Genesis chapter 4 is the story of Cain and Abel. And there's some things that are interesting in this chapter that at least touched my heart when I was reading them and helped me out a little bit. And then we're going to try to get to Genesis chapter 5. Genesis chapter 5 is one of those lineage things. So-and-so begat so-and-so and lived so many years, and but there's a reason for that. Even though sometimes we don't understand the reason. So we're going to try to get to Genesis chapter 5 if possible. If not, then we'll do it some other time. Okay, Genesis chapter 4. And Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. She again bare his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain was a tiller of the ground. So here we see the story about Cain and Abel being born to Adam and Eve, and it's an interesting thing here. It says that Adam knew Eve. The word here for knew means that he knew her in a sexual relationship way, in a way to have children, and it means to actually to be experienced. Another word for this word knew is he experienced Eve, or she experienced him. They came together, okay, is what it's all about. Okay. The word conceived is only used once in these two passages, but there's two kids. Leads some to believe that they could have been twins. Cain could have been born first as a twin. Abel could have been born second. Not going to be dogmatic about that. Don't know. But it only talks about conceived one time and then talks about two children. So leads some people to believe that that was the case, that they were twins. Now it talks about their jobs. And it says Abel was a keeper of sheep, which means that he tended flocks. We kind of know what a keeper of sheep is. I had an uncle who lived in Michigan, and he was a sheep farmer. I don't know that farmer is the right term, but that's what he called it. So he raised sheep. He worked for the Detroit Edison, the power company, during his normal hours, and kept sheep as a hobby, which I thought was rather interesting concept. He tended sheep. Think about this a minute. Why would he tend sheep before the flood? What could you do with sheep before the flood? Man did not eat meat before the flood, or wasn't supposed to eat meat before the flood, let's put it that way. For clothes, good. What else was it used for? Sacrifice. Remember back in chapter 3, God made coats of skins to clothe Adam and Eve, and so he could have, his purpose there in raising sheep, raising goats, whatever he raised, okay, he performed a function of sacrifice, providing for the sacrifice and also providing for clothing. Sheepskins are a whole heck of a lot better than aprons made out of fig leaves. Okay. Cain, it says, was a tiller of the ground. I think this is kind of interesting. He was a tiller of the ground. He followed in Daddy's footsteps, right? Daddy was a tiller of the ground. If we read back in chapter 3, we just read that he would, in the sweat of his brow, so forth and so on. Of the two brothers that are here, whether they be twins or not, one worked a lot harder than the other one. And I can say that from experience. I tried to do a garden several times. That's a lot of labor, especially when you don't have a John Deere. Okay? You're out hoeing a garden, you're working. I mean, it's hard work to work a garden to provide food. It's a lot of labor. It's not that difficult to watch sheep roam around and protect them. And by the way, this is before wolves would eat sheep, so it would have been pretty easy. So relatively speaking, Abel had a lot easier job than Cain, right? If you look back at chapter 3, verse 17, while you're right there, just flip on over. It talks about tilling the ground. Cursed is the ground for thy sake. Verse 18, Thorns and thistles shall it bring forth. Verse 19, in the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread. The farmer's got a tough way to go. He's got a hard road to hoe here, a hard worker. Verse number 3. In the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. Verse number 4. And Abel, he also brought of the firstlings of a flock of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering, but unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. So they're bringing their offering, and it's interesting that the terminology that's used here, it says in the process of time. Actually, in the Hebrew, if you were very strict in translating the Hebrew, it would be at the end of days. It almost implies that there was a specific set time to come before the Lord to bring your offering. Now, offerings could be used for all kind of different things, and we're going to get to, let's get to it now. It says that Cain's offering God did not have respect for, but Abel's offering God did have respect for. There are many people who believe that the reason for that being was that Cain's offering was bloodless. It did not have blood. There's no blood in wheat or corn or whatever, okay? And it's not bloodless. But the problem with that theory is, with that thinking is that there are many Old Testament offerings that had no blood in them. The drink offering was one. The meat offering was another. The meal offering was another. So those are 3 different types of offerings. There probably are more. I didn't study any harder than 3. But there are many offerings that did not contain blood. Why was Cain's offering accepted or not accepted, and Abel's offering was? Turn to Hebrews 11:4. Hebrews 11:4. Kind of gives an answer here why Abel's was accepted and Cain's was not. Hebrews 11:4 says, by faith Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain. And it says, by which he obtained a witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and by it he being dead yet speaketh. So Cain's offering was not considered to be a righteous offering. It was the wrong offering because it was how it was done. Not what it was, but it was not done in faith. Abel offered in faith. Evidently, Cain did not offer in faith. I mean, I'm not to be his judge, I'm just reading what it says. Okay? So the offering was not done in faith. In the process of time, at the end of days, he brought an offering. An offering, what's an offering? Anybody want to hazard a guess what an offering is? Yeah, a voluntary tribute, a voluntary giving is something that you give. It's offering. Go ahead.
He's talking about he offered God a more excellent sacrifice than which he obtained through righteousness. I'm not sure exactly where it is, but it talks about, when our works are going to be tried by fire, whether they're good or bad. Whether we did them for God, out of a right heart, or we did them because of obligation. I wonder if maybe that's what they were talking about right here.
Very good.
Abel was, a right offering and Cain's right.
Very good. Turn to Isaiah chapter 1. Isaiah chapter 1. We're going to read verses 11 maybe through 17. I don't know. We'll see how far we can get.
Hugh, what we turned to one other thing, talking about that offering that Abel brought. You have a lot of faiths in this world. I believe Abel's faith was a blood faith.
Right.
It's the same faith we hold today.
Right.
We hold faith in the shed blood of Jesus Christ for the remission of sin. There's a lot of, the Mormons across the road, they'll go to God in a faith, but it ain't a righteous faith before God. That's I believe in that offering, in them passages. you have two truths there. One's not true without the other.
Right.
The blood is a necessary thing, but also that faith in that shed blood.
Right.
That for the remission of sins, that he could come before God in his offering.
Amen.
Sort of like the high priest, when the high priest in the Old Testament, when he went in before God, he had to go in first through the blood, and then he could offer the other things. And so it's both through the blood and through faith, is what I'm trying to say, I guess.
Showing a picture of what is yet to come down the road. Yeah, faith and the blood. Yeah, and it's a combination of both. Yes?
But he was too, that not all things require blood. But in Hebrews chapter 9, verse 22 says, and
Almost.
all purged with blood, and without shedding of blood is no remission.
Exactly.
So, depending on what the sacrifice for, it did require.
That's exactly right. It depends upon what the sacrifice was for. You can go to God and you can give sacrifice for Thanksgiving. You can give sacrifice for a lot of different things. Why they came at this particular time to give sacrifice, I don't know, but I suspect it was for a sacrifice of atonement. It was a sacrifice of repentance, right? It was a sacrifice for sin, and that needs blood. Isaiah chapter 1, verses 10 through 17. We'll just read a little bit here. To what purpose is the multitude of your sacrifices unto me, saith the Lord? I am full of burnt offerings, of rams, and the fat of fed beasts. And I delight not in blood of bullocks, or of lambs, or of goats. When ye come to appear before me, who hath required this at your hand to tread my courts? Bring no more vain oblations. Incense is an abomination unto me. And the new moons and the Sabbaths and the calling of assemblies I cannot away with. It is iniquity, even the solemn meeting. Now let's stop there for just a second. Did not God tell them through Moses all these things to do? Did he not tell them to have new assemblies? Did he not tell them to do sacrifices? Did he not tell them to do offerings? It's not the doing of the offering, it's what's behind it. It's the intent. It's the heart. It's what's your heart. We can come to church and we can sit in a church meeting and we can listen to preaching, but if your heart's not in it, you might as well be a stone sitting in the back pew someplace, right? I mean, that's really what he's getting at here. It's what's your heart. Go on down to verse number 16, for sake of time. He talks about all these different offerings, and God's saying, in effect, I've had it up to here with all your sacrifices and your ceremonies and your rites. In verse number 16, wash you, make you clean, and put away the evil of your doings from before mine eyes. Cease to do evil, learn to do good. Seek judgment, relieve the oppressed, judge the fatherless, plead for the widow. It's what's in your heart that counts, not the actual act. When I was growing up, I lived in a city where it was a suburb actually, but it was a pretty huge suburb, and pretty much all around us in the neighborhood, we lived in a subdivision. And the subdivision was very nice houses, you know, kind of upper middle class, you know, brick, you know, the whole 9 yards. This is in Michigan. And everybody in my neighborhood's last name ended in an O or an I or a ski. I mean, they were all pretty much Polish or Italian, all right? And so I had an opportunity to go a couple of times to a Catholic service. And they have, I mean, I don't know if you've ever been to one of those things, but they're pretty ornate, right? Big fancy altar and all kinds of glitz and gold and glitter and whatever, and deader than a doornail on the inside because they go through the motions. They talk in Latin, which nobody that I know of understands, not unless you're an old Roman. So they get up and they talk and they do all the thing, but there's no heart behind it. I believe what we're talking about here is why was Abel's sacrifice accepted and Cain's was not? Because Abel's heart was in it. He had a desire to seek and please the Lord. Cain, on the other hand, had a desire to seek and please himself. Look at how good my offering is. Okay, and his offering was not accepted. Let's go back and read where we were at here. Sir? Yeah.
But also, Cain's sacrifice represents what
Right.
he did by himself. He probably fell to his offering because this is what he did with his
Yes.
Abel, his sacrifice, he did nothing. He bought
Right.
an animal. So that represents salvation by blood.
Amen. And that's the point of the fact that we talked a little bit before about Cain had to work a whole heck of a lot harder to get what he got out of his, I mean, it was physical labor on his part, whereas Abel just sort of walked around and watched the sheep. By the way, have you ever been in a field with a bunch of sheep? Driving sheep is like driving cats. You know, they go everywhere. That's why you need a dog. But you're right. Cain's sacrifice shows forth human effort and human labor, and it's not by human effort and human labor. We wouldn't even come to God in the first place unless it were He calling us. So that's the case. Where are we at here? Okay. Cain brought of the firstlings of his flock. The Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering, and unto Cain and his offering he had not respect. I thought God was not a respecter of persons. Or is he? He's not a respecter of persons, but he is a respecter of the sacrifice that's offered and given. We can't just worship God any way we want to. He has a way for us to worship Him. He has a method. He has a system. He has a way of worship. I don't know how else to put it. And He wants us to have order in His service, and He wants us to follow some prescribed ways. But to be spontaneous at the same time. It's a good trick. Okay. Verse number 6. And the Lord said unto Cain, Why art thou wroth? Why is thy countenance fallen? I like this picture. His countenance is fallen. Have you ever seen anybody go from a smiley to a dopey face? Oh, you know. Why is your countenance fallen? Why are you mad? Why are you upset? If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted. So in other words, Cain wanted to do things his own way. Go back in your memory bank here to last week, how was Adam and Eve's sin covered up? Did not God make them coats of skins? So God made them coats of skins, and it was covered up. God had a specific way. You see, Adam and Eve tried to make aprons out of figs, and it wasn't acceptable. It wasn't God's way of doing things. You and I cannot just worship God any way we desire, any way we please. He has a specific way that He wishes us to worship Him. If we follow that specific way, we're showing Him we love Him. To be obedient is to show love, is it not? And so, here's what He's saying. If you do well, won't you be accepted? And if you doest not well, sin lieth at the door. And unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. He's being warned here. Do it God's way, or sin is lying at the door. Unfortunately, sin is always lying at the door. Sin is not too far away from any of us. At least we think that we're Holy Joe and that we're beyond that anymore. Be careful. Okay? Be careful, because you're setting yourself up for one big fall. Sin is lying at the door. Verse number 8. And Cain talked with Abel his brother. And it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him. There are several older versions of the Old Testament. I can't pronounce these names to save my life. The Septuagint, the Syriac, something or another. I mean, these older, let me see if I can. Septuagint, yeah, there's a couple of others too. The Syriac, the Septuagint, and the Samaritan Pentateuch. All three of these other older versions add the phrase, "Let us go out to the field." I don't know. I'm looking at this and I'm reading my King James Bible and I accept what the King James says. But if in fact what was actually said at that time frame was "let us go out into the field," it doesn't harm the meaning here. But what it does show is this. It shows premeditation. Think about it. Cain offered his offering and God did not accept it. What did Abel have to do with that? Nothing. So who was Cain mad at?
Boy, he's mad at God.
He was mad at God, yeah. I mean, what had Abel done? Abel brought his flock, his sheep, whatever it was, goats. He brought them and they were sacrificed. Abel didn't do anything other than what was come natural to him. He was a keeper of sheep, was he not? Cain was upset because his sacrifice was not accepted, but God was the one that didn't accept it. It wasn't Abel that didn't accept it. So it looks here like Cain says to his brother, "Hey, let's go out into the field." If that was indeed the case. I'm not saying it was, I don't know. But if that was indeed the case, let's go out in the field. It shows premeditation. He's thinking in his head, wait till I get you out in the field, I'm going to do you in. Okay? It wasn't just a moment of anger where he rose up in flaming anger and murdered his brother. That's one thing. Not that it's a good thing, but it's certainly one thing. But to premeditate, to plan it out, is something totally different. It is indeed in our court system today. You will find that that's even true. Okay. Sir.
Can I make a mention on that?
Yeah.
What you're talking about, a lot of times it says Cain rose up against Abel, when they were in the field. A lot of times when we're talking to or witnessing to people, especially, say the Catholic faith or any, religion of works, and we tell them, God's simple plan of salvation, it's not what they do, it's what He did.
Right.
A lot of times they will rise up against
Oh, yeah.
us. And, it's possible something similar to this, maybe not, we've not faced it to the extent. But look at, you think about all the missionaries and stuff that's been killed over the years for this kind of same purpose. They give, God's grace and explain His, and the people rose up against them.
They're not really mad at their brother, they're really mad at the message.
Right.
Which is really what happens many, many times. When you go to the door and you knock on the door of somebody's house and they slam the door in your face with a bunch of curse words, you're going to invite them to come to church and give them a gospel. They're not rejecting you. They're rejecting Him. And that's indeed the case many, many times. It's interesting to me that the sacrifice that God was asking for was, in this particular case, Cain's sacrifice was not accepted. It was a bloodless sacrifice. I'm not going to go back and redo what I said before, although I'm not changing my mind. Abel's sacrifice was a blood sacrifice. Cain's sacrifice was not a blood sacrifice. God says, in so many words, He's saying, I reject your sacrifice, Cain. It's the wrong sacrifice. Cain gets all upset. His countenance fell, right? He's got mopey face. He's mad. He's upset. So God says to him, if you do well, if you do what's right, if you do what I have asked of you to do, won't it be well with you? And that's my translation, but that's basically what it says here, okay? If you do well. Think about this. Cain is the elder brother, is he not? Abel is the younger brother. We're going to talk about sibling rivalry here just a little bit, but if Cain is the elder brother, it's got to be humiliating to the elder brother to have to go to the younger brother for the sacrifice. I'm sure he's not real happy with that. Not only is his offering not acceptable because it's of his own labor, which we just talked about, Okay, not only is it not acceptable of his own labor, but now he's got to, if you will, humble himself, go to his brother and buy a proper sacrifice to give. All right, so he's mad, he's upset. He takes his brother out in the field and he does his brother in. Verse number 9, and the Lord said unto Cain, where is Abel thy brother? You think God didn't know? He knew. He knows all things. And he said unto, and the Lord said unto Cain, where is Abel thy brother? And he said, I know not. What's that? That's a bull-faced lie, okay? Am I my brother's keeper? What's that? That's disrespect. Not disrespect for his brother, that's disrespect for God, okay? And he said, what hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground. Cain was a what? He was a tiller of the ground, was he not? He killed his brother and shed his brother's blood, and the blood went into the ground. Effectively, what happened here is Cain has polluted his own best interest. Excuse me. Cain is one who lives and puts his whole life and his whole attitude, everything that's involved, he puts it into the ground and his own labor and his own work. Now, verse 11, now art thou cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. Then when thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth. And Cain said unto the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. God is telling him that what he loves the most, what he's so fond of the most is the earth and what the earth can produce for him as a farmer. God's taking that away from him. He has polluted he's polluted his own nest, if you want to think about it that way. That's exactly what he's done. And Cain says, oh, my punishment is more than I can bear. More than I can. What about his brother? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, forgive self and condemn everybody else. Yeah. When thou tillest the ground, it shall henceforth yield unto thee, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth. We know the rest of the story, that Cain's crying to the Lord, oh, somebody's going to come get me. Somebody's going to revenge my brother Abel. So he's not too worried about killing his brother Abel. He doesn't seem to be remorseful that Abel's dead, but he's remorseful that he himself might suffer the same fate. A lot of criminals are the same way. They're not sorry for what they did. They're sorry for the consequences that it might bring, okay? And so he's fearful that what happened to his brother is going to happen to him, all right? Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth. I'm in verse 14. And from thy face shall I be hid, and I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond. Twice this has been stated, a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth. And it shall come to pass that everyone that findeth me shall slay me. A fugitive and a vagabond. I looked the words up. It means to run away. A vagabond means one who roams, who has no set place. God's going to put a mark on Cain, which we won't read. We'll skip that part for reading. You read it on your own. But God's going to put a mark on Cain that's going to say, basically, leave Cain alone, don't kill him. That mark doesn't bring any comfort to Cain. He's always looking over his shoulder. He's always afraid if the next person he meets might do him in. He's always fearful. He's committed the ultimate crime, the ultimate sin that could be committed in those days, okay? And because he's done that, he has no peace. He has no peace. He's convicted. Now, he could have come to the Lord when God said, what hast thou done? And what could he have done? He could have confessed. He could have repented of his sin. He could have said, forgive me. He could have done all kinds. He didn't do any of that. All he was concerned about was him. And rather than going and being sorrowful for killing his brother, rather than asking God for mercy, pleading with God for grace, he doesn't do any of that. God has no choice. The only thing he can do is basically judge him. And he does judge him. But this is interesting. If you look over in Genesis 9:6, you'll find out that the penalty for murder is death sentence. But this is before 9:6. God doesn't give him the death sentence. Would have been me. But God doesn't give him the death sentence. What does he do? He gives him something worse. He gives him a life sentence. He's always looking over his shoulder. No matter where he goes, he's fearful that somebody's going to do him in. We're not going to get very far. Oh my goodness, 4 or 5 more minutes. All right, let's go over to verse number 16. And Cain went out of the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. By the way, that word Nod means wandering. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch and builded a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. And unto Enoch was born Irad, and Irad began Mehujael, and Mehujael begat Methusael, and Methusael begat Lamech. And Lamech took to him 2 wives. The name of one was Ada, and the name of the other was Zillah. And Ada bare Jubal, which was the father of them that dwelt in tents, and of such as have cattle. And his brother's name was Jubal, and he was the father of such as handle the harp and the organ. And Zillah also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. And Lamech said unto his wives Ada and Zillah, Hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech, hearken unto my speech, for I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. Okay, this passage talks about the line of Cain. Cain goes out from the presence of the Lord. By the way, the biggest problem that a sinner has is he's out of the presence of the Lord. Okay? Hell will be out of the presence of the Lord. We won't have the opportunity to come to the Lord to have him comfort us if we go to hell. Cain knew his wife. Where did he get his wife from? I've had people in jail ask me that all the time. Yeah, that's exactly right. I had one man in Florida ask me one time, he said, where did Cain get his wife from? I said, if I tell you where Cain got his wife from, will you listen to what I have to say for about 5 minutes? And he said, yeah, sure. Okay. He married his sister. Think about it. How long did they live back then? 850, 900 years? 930 years, I think? 950? 969 years was as long as one of Methuselah lived, if I'm not mistaken. By the way, what does it say about Noah? It says that Noah was 500 and he had Ham, Sheth, and Japheth. In 500 years, you can produce lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of kids, and they can produce lots and lots of kids. I did this mathematically one time, just as a kind of a lark, and it turned into be one heck of a study. But by the year 400 or 500 from creation, there would have been over 1 million people floating around on this earth. And do the math sometimes. 2 have 2, and those 2 have 2, and those 2 have 2, and those 2 have 2, and on and on and on and on. And it's well over 1 million for 400 or 500 years. He married his sister, okay? And that was before there was a prohibition to do so. And it talks about various different jobs that he has here. Cain was the one who founded a city. He made a city. We call that urbanization or civilization. Okay, there was another one that was a nomadic shepherd. Where are we at here? Jabal, father of such as dwell as tents and such as have cattle. Animal husbandry is what we would call it today. You don't just walk around following sheep and flocks and herds and whatever. You got to take care of them, all right? And then there's another one here that his name was Jubal, and he was the father of all of such handle harp and organ. Any of those of you who are musicians here will recognize the fact that music is based upon mathematics. Okay? Then we have this fellow Tubal-Cain, and it says he was an artificer, and he was involved in metallurgy. Not only did he make brass, by the way, is an alloy. I think it's tin and copper put together. You have to do the right mixture, so it's pretty difficult to do brass. And iron was even more advanced than that, because the brass age, according to science, the brass age comes before the iron age. What do we see here? We see a bunch of cavemen, right? We see a bunch of Neanderthals, a bunch of troglodytes walking around, not being able to do anything. We've got people who are involved in building civilization. We've got people who are involved in animal husbandry. We've got people who are involved in music. We've got people who are involved in metallurgy. Not so stupid after all, are they?
The word artifact also means specialist or inventor.
Yes, yes. Yeah, they weren't stupid by any means of the imagination. There's a program that's on TV that I have a hard time staying away from, and it's called Ancient Aliens. Anybody ever see that stupid program? Don't. It's a dumb program. It talks all about we got here by ancient aliens from outer space, and it's a long story. My brother here brought up a point when I talked about ancient aliens last week, and I believe it was Brother Keith Lee talked about it. It says back in Genesis chapter 3 that Eve was the mother of all living. So much for the ancient alien theory. I don't even know how I got on that, but just hopped right out there. Okay, there's a lot of theories that men have, but that doesn't make them right. Okay, Lamech turns out here, he gets really bold and brassy. He tells it, he's got two wives, first of all. What does it say back in Genesis 23 and 24? You shall be one flesh. How do you be one flesh with two or three women? Don't work that way. You two shall be one flesh. So he broke God's standing law or standing principle right there. Then he goes and he kills a young man and he brags about it. How could this guy Lamech kill a younger man? Was not his son Tubal-Cain a metallurgist? Did he not make brass and iron? What can you do with brass and iron? Make weapons, okay? So he made weapons, I'm sure, in this particular case. And then he brags. Well, if Cain would be avenged 7 times by the Lord, then I guarantee that I will avenge myself 77 times against anybody that comes after me. The world is going downhill fast in this particular case, and this is what it's all about. Read the rest of the chapter. There's not much left. Another son comes up. His name is Seth, and we're going to talk about the names of those next week. Brother, would you close us in prayer?
Dearest Heavenly Father,